Okay, hello everyone. I think we're good. Starting soon, less than a minute. Hopefully the connection stays up today. It's weather's really bad here. Sometimes it interferes with the satellite connection. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good evening, everyone. Continuing on with our study of Visuddhimagga, chapter by chapter. Last week we did chapter 14 on the aggregates, which is, as I noted last week, that's actually a pretty good introduction to many Abhidhamma concepts. And again, in this chapter, a lot of it touches on the Abhidhamma. Chapter 15, the bases and elements. Basically, it's about the six senses, the five physical senses and the mind sense, looked at in two different ways. Ayatana is translated here as bases. Other translators have translated it as sphere. And it's used in different contexts in the text, but in terms of the relation to the senses, it divides the whole field of our senses into 12 categories. That is, each of the six senses and its object. So there's eye base, visible data base, ear base, sound base, nose base, odor base, tongue base, flavor base, body base, tangible database, mind base, and mental database. So the first thing to note is that in Buddhism we always talk about six senses rather than five. There's the five commonly cited physical senses, and there is the mind sense, that is the cognition of mental objects. So a memory or a thought or imagination is received by consciousness as mental data, and mind consciousness is a separate category from eye consciousness, ear consciousness, etc. The section on the bases is relatively brief and straightforward. Most of the meat of this chapter, and this chapter as a whole is much shorter than the previous chapter, but the main complications come in with the next section, the description of the elements, dhatu. First of all, there's some clarification about what's meant by element, because there are different uses of element. We talk about the four physical elements, earth, air, fire, water. There's what Buddhaghosa calls mundane description of elements, which are like types of material. It gives examples as like gold, silver, etc. So here we're talking about the elements of sense impression, and this is 18. It's the other one was 2 by 6. This is 3 by 6, because for each sense it includes the physical organ of sense, such as the eye, the object of sense, such as a vision, visible, what's called here visible data element, and then eye consciousness element. cognition to occur, you have the organ of sense, the object of sense, and consciousness arising through that sense door. These three coming together in a dependent origination, they're called phassa, or contact. Then there's a section dealing with other kinds of elements, and this has got some interest. It's in starting with paragraph 25, dealing with different kinds of elements that are not included in the senses, but then it comes to the conclusion that in the end they all reduce to the 18 sense elements, because everything we experience is through the senses, through one of the six senses. This is equivalent to the Buddhist statement that when he says loka, meaning the world, he's referring to just these six senses, because this is our world. And this is, I think, a common theme of the Buddhist approach and the Buddhist way of teaching, is that it's phenomenological. It's based on experience. He's not really interested in the metaphysics or the ontology of what's beyond our experience. That's all kind of idle speculation, because all we can really know and experience is mediated through consciousness and mediated through the six senses. So this becomes equivalent. The six senses are the equivalent of the world. One of the points here, and this is several paragraphs of reducing all other kinds of elements to the six senses. One point of interest here is in terms of the physical dhatu. Earth, fire, and air are tangible data element. Water and space are mental data element only. This is referencing an idea found in Abhidhamma that apo, the water element, is not perceived by the sense of touch. This may seem odd, because you think, well, I can put my hand in a bowl of water and feel it, but you have to remember that the four physical elements don't refer strictly to the physical objects of those names. The names earth, air, fire, water are more like mnemonic devices to refer to qualities or states. So water has the water element, apodhatu, has the quality of fluidity and also the quality of the taking of shape. The analogy is if you pour water into a vase, it takes the shape of the vase. It doesn't have an innate shape of its own. From paragraph 35, there's a discussion of causes and results of the different elements, and this is a section that references the categories found in the Abhidhamma book, the Patana, which discusses causality. It's actually a very long work. It's over several volumes. And it deals with 20 kinds of causality. For example, I'm just reading the first one out. The I element is a condition in 6 ways: dissociation, prenascence, presence, non-disappearance, support, and faculty for the I consciousness element. So these are types of causality that apply to the I element. When he gets to the mind element, there's again a reference to Abhidhamma in another way. It's referencing the Chitta Vitti, the cognitive series, which I mentioned last time. There's a brief description of it in the previous chapter. The Chitta Vitti is an important concept in Abhidhamma. It's an analysis of the process by which you're cognizing an object. And it's a rather complicated teaching, because there's all kinds of variations on which sense door, and if the object is a vivid one, or so on. You won't find a really good description of the Chitta Vitti here in the Sudhimagga. The best place to approach that teaching is, as I mentioned previously, Bhikkhu Bodhi's Manual of Abhidhamma, which is a translation of the Abhidhamma Sangaha, an important commentary on Abhidhamma, together with his Bhikkhu Bodhi's own commentary description. There is, at the back of this book, there is a table, the back of the English translation of Sudhimagga, there is a table illustrating the cognitive series. So you can get a kind of an idea from it from this book, but I would, if you're interested, I'd really refer you to the Manual of Abhidhamma. In this paragraph, when he's talking about the mind element, which is first of all, mind element and mind consciousness element are two separate concepts. The mind element is the equivalent to the physical organ of sense, such as the eye or ear. It's the base for mind objects, just for the taking of mind objects. And mind consciousness is consciousness that is working through the mind element and perceiving a purely mental object. And you'll see if you read the text here, you'll see that he has numbers in brackets in the text, such as the adverting mind element, bracket 70. Is a condition, etc. These numbers refer back to the previous chapter. It's a scholarly device that the translator Nyanamoli added into the text that makes it a little bit more accessible for the difficult bits. And these numbers refer to the different consciousnesses, as listed in the previous chapter, 89 kinds of consciousness. So you can refer back to the previous chapter and reference it here. The end of the chapter, he uses some images to demonstrate or illustrate the impermanent suffering and emptiness of these elements. For example, the formations aggregate should be regarded as men who throw one into a pit of hot coals, because they throw one into rebirth linking, or as thieves pursued by the king's men, because they are pursued by the pains of birth. Then he says the unformed element should be regarded as deathless, as peace and safety. Why? Because it is the opposite of all ill. The unformed element is a name for nibbana. And in the last paragraph, the mind consciousness element should be regarded as a forest monkey because it does not stay still on the object. And this image is probably the origin of the common phrase, the monkey mind. Mind consciousness is a forest monkey, jumping around from branch to branch, or as a wild horse because it's difficult to tame, or as a stick flung into the air because it falls anyhow, or as a stage dancer because it adopts the guise of the various defilements such as greed and hate. So that's a relatively short chapter, and as this whole kind of middle section of the book, it references Abhidhamma a fair bit. One of the functions of the Abhidhamma is, or of the Visuddhimagga, is a kind of encyclopedia of the Buddhist teachings, and he references Sutta and Abhidhamma interchangeably throughout. The next chapter next week, it's another fairly brief one, but it's an important one. It deals with two of the most fundamental teachings of the Buddha, the faculties and the truths, the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so we'll look at that next week, and then the week after that is another very important one, dependent origination, Paticca that's another long chapter, and it's very technical. And next week should be a little easier. So I'll stop there, and we go on and see if there's anything to address in the chat. When we envisage a shape in the mind's eye, is this the mind sense or still eye consciousness? This is eye consciousness. If an object occurs without an external reference point. And actually, if you, it doesn't really get into it in this chapter, but if you analyze the series of cognition, how an object is processed in the mind, everything ends up in the mind sense at the end. We have a visual data, like you see an apple sitting on the table. Then this is passed on to the mind sense, and it's only an interesting detail is it's only the mind sense and the sense of touch that make enough impression on the being to cause Vedana or feeling to arise. When we see something beautiful, it causes pleasant feeling, but indirectly, because the eye sense doesn't actually perceive beauty. It perceives color and shape, and then perception recognizes an apple, and the mind sense takes that perception and reacts to it, producing a Vedana or pleasant feeling. Do you recommend learning all the suttas before starting to learn from Abhidhamma, or should you learn both together? Is suttas enough for a layperson to attain sotapanna? A two-part question. I would say that it doesn't hurt to study some Abhidhamma early on. I would start with the suttas, but I don't think you have to go through the entire Sutta Pitaka before you start looking at Abhidhamma. And is suttas enough for a layperson to attain sotapanna? I don't think, really, strictly speaking, you don't need any study or very little. You just have to know the basic teachings. Is Nibbana known as deathless element? Yes. Has anyone given a description of what the experience of deathless element is like, since all Aryans get a glimpse of this element? No, because it cannot be described. It's one thing to note here is it's important to note that deathless is amata. Deathless is a literal translation. It is not to be confused with everlasting. It's outside of time. Birth and death do not apply to Nibbana. So it's deathless, but it's also unborn, ajata. If a new set of 5 records are made when it's reborn, and how does the stream of consciousness move to the new Namarupa? How does someone remember past lives? There's nothing that actually transfers from life to life, but it's a chain of cause and effect. And it's the new consciousness arising in each. It doesn't matter about birth and death. In each moment, consciousness is arising again, but it has the whole chain of previous causes that cause it to come into being. So they're kind of baked into it. It's sort of like, take a mundane analogy is it's sort of like blockchain. How does karma relate to the elements? Well, first of all, elements arise due to the elements in this, as in this chapter, the physical organs of sight and so on, arise because of karma. You take a human form and have these particular array of senses because of past karma, and this will also be a karmic effect in how keen the senses are, whether you have good vision and hearing, or whether you have poor vision and hearing. It's all related to karma. If one makes an aspiration in the next life to be reborn in, for example, to Sita or Tawa Tingsa, is there a guarantee you'll be able to practice Dhamma and meditate in that realm to achieve Nibbana? No, there's no guarantee that in any realm, really. But it is possible. It becomes more difficult in some ways for a Dewa, because they can become distracted by all the sense pleasures in those realms, and the lack of suffering that doesn't provide them any motive. But there are Dewas who attain to Sotapatti. And the Buddha said there's no heaven realm that is empty of Sotapannas. Tusita is probably the ideal realm, because the Bodhisattva is dwelling there, so you can receive teachings directly. It's also said in one of the commentaries, one of the benefits of memorizing Dhamma is that the phrases, and it really means memorizing in Pali. If you're reborn in a Dewa realm, those memories can recur to you, and you can receive the understanding of the Dhamma through the work done in the human life. Okay, so I think that's not much this week. It's a pretty brief chapter, not a lot of questions. So if you want to continue on, if you're reading along, as I said, the next one is chapter 16, and it's not a very long chapter either. Just a comment in the chat here. Someone's recommending Theravada Abhidhamma by Karunadasa. Yes, I would recommend that book highly. It's a very good book. Can you expand on where we have agency to make a choice? Is anatta real and there's no control, or do we have a choice at all? Yes, we do. There's a moment in this. We keep referencing this week the cognitive series. There's a moment in the processing of the mind that is called the jhana, or impulsions. It's the same root as javelin in English. It's when the mind is let's say free, and the intention um, allows the mind to kind of pulse in one direction or another. The rest of the cognitive series is resultant, meaning that we have no control over it, and it doesn't require a controller. But there's no self, but there is this moment of freedom of the mind being unfixed, let's say. Okay, so let's leave that for now, and I'm glad that the connection held up this long. Like I said, the weather here is really heavy. It's really dark out. Okay, I'll leave you there, and see you again next week.